There is a moment in almost every meeting where someone begins explaining a problem. They start with background. They explain what happened last month. They walk through the sequence. They clarify what they already tried. They fill in context so no one misunderstands. And while they're speaking, something subtle shifts in the room. Eyes move down to laptops. The conversation, energy lowers. The decision maker stops leaning forward. The explanation is accurate, it's thorough, it's responsible, and somehow it still makes the room heavier. If you've experienced that, this episode is for you. Today, I'm going to show you how to explain problems at work so you're seen as useful and not overwhelming. Because the issue is not whether you're clear. The issue is whether your explanation lowers or raises decision cost. And usefulness at senior levels is defined by cost, not effort, not accuracy, cost. So, let's start there. When leaders evaluate a problem explanation, they are unconsciously asking three things. 1. How big is this? 2. How contained is this? And 3. What do you need from me? If your explanation answers those questions quickly, you're useful. If your explanation delays those answers, you feel expensive. And the difference often comes down to structure. So, let's rebuild the structure. First, you must lead with the constraint, not the history. Most professionals begin at the beginning. They say something like, 2 weeks ago, we noticed some inconsistencies in the vendor data, so we reached out to them, and then they said they were updating their system, and then we tested again, and then. By the time they reach the actual impact, the decision maker has already started calculating the cognitive weight of the conversation. Instead, start where the decision sits. For example, this issue affects the Q3 launch timeline because our vendor shifted delivery by 10 days. Notice the difference? You did not narrate the journey. You named the constraint. You placed it directly on the decision surface. That changes how you're experienced. Let me give you a corporate example. Imagine you are in marketing. A product launch campaign is scheduled for July 1st. Creative assets are finalized. Media is booked. Then a supplier delay affects packaging. The most common explanation sounds like this. So we're waiting on the final packaging proof, and the supplier had a backlog, and they told us last Thursday that production would take longer, and we've been going back and forth. Useful framing sounds like this. Our July 1st launch is at risk because packaging production moved 10 days later than planned. Now, the room understands the constraint. Now, the decision can form. So, instead of beginning at the beginning, begin at the impact. Once you lead with the constraint, the next move is compression. This is where most people lose usefulness. They continue explaining every variable involved. Every email, every nuance, every dependency. They believe more information creates clarity. In decision environments, more information increases evaluation load. So, your job is not to narrate. Your job is to compress. Compression means reducing the problem to only what the decision requires. For example, imagine an operation leader explaining a cost overrun. Instead of saying, we had higher transportation costs because fuel prices rose, and then we had to reroute shipments due to weather, and there was some internal miscommunications with scheduling, compress it. Compress it to, we are over budget by 8% due to increased transportation costs tied to fuel pricing and rerouted shipments. You can elaborate if asked. You do not need to volunteer the entire landscape. When you compress effectively, leaders experience you as organized. When you expand unnecessarily, however, they experience you as uncontrolled. And this is important because perceived control is one of the strongest predictors of inclusion. Now that you have led with constraint and compressed to decision relevant facts, the third move is containment. Containment is a difference between escalation and management. Overwhelming explanations often feel large. They sound systemic. They feel contagious. Useful explanations signal boundaries. So, let's go back to the marketing example. You could say, this delay could affect our launch messaging, partner commitments, media timing, and retailer alignment. That sounds expansive. Instead, this delay affects packaging production only. Creative and media timelines remain intact. Now you have contained the scope. Containment lowers executive stress. And when you lower stress, you increase trust. Let's look at another example. This time, you're in finance. A reporting error was discovered in last month's numbers. The instinct is to explain how the mistake happened. The system glitch, the reconciliation gap, the cross-check issue. Instead, start like this. We identified a reporting error in last month's numbers. It affects one regional data set and does not impact consolidated totals. You have just contained the problem. You did not hide it. You framed its boundaries. And that is usefulness. Now, we move to the fourth step. Offer framed options. Overwhelming professionals explain problems and then stop. They look at the room. They say, what do you think? That transfers cognitive burden upward. Useful professionals reduce friction. They narrow the path. For example, in response to the packaging delay, we have two options. We can shift launch by 1 week, or we can proceed with a limited initial rollout while packaging completes. I recommend the limited rollout to preserve media investment. Now the decision maker is evaluating, not inventing. And that matters because senior leaders include people who reduce decision friction, not people who increase it. Let's walk through a consulting scenario. You are presenting to a client. A project milestone slipped. You could say, we encountered several coordination challenges between teams, and timelines started overlapping, and we're still analyzing the impact. Or you could say, our milestone moved by 2 weeks due to cross-team coordination delays. We can either reallocate resources to recover 1 week or adjust downstream deadlines. I recommend reallocation. The second version signals containment, clarity, and direction. Now, the final step. Directional close. This is where episode 3 and episode 4 connect. After framing the problem and offering options, you must close with forward motion. For example, unless I hear otherwise, we'll proceed with option 1 and adjust timelines accordingly. You have reduced ambiguity. You've signaled ownership, lower decision cost, and that combination makes you useful. Now, let's talk about what often goes wrong. Professionals equate thoroughness with responsibility. They believe that explaining everything protects them. In reality, excessive detail increases perceived complexity, and complexity decreases inclusion. Now, this does not mean you omit risk. It means you stage it. If a leader asks you for more detail, you provide it. You keep layers available. You do not open with all of them. Think of it like architecture. The structural beam must be visible. The wiring can remain behind the wall until needed. Let's consider a management example. A team member is underperforming. The common explanation in a leadership meeting might sound like this. They've struggled with deadlines, and there were some communication breakdowns, and morale has been inconsistent, and there may be some external factors. A useful framing would be, this team member has missed 3 major deadlines this quarter. The issue appears tied to workload prioritization, not capability. I'm implementing a revised tracking system to address it. See that? Clear, contained, action-oriented. Notice how each example reduces narrative and increases structure. Now, I want to go one layer deeper. There is a psychological principle operating here. Decision makers have limited evaluation bandwidth. Every time you explain a problem, you're asking them to allocate that bandwidth. If your explanation feels linear and bounded, they allocate calmly. If your explanation feels scattered or expansive, they conserve energy. And when they conserve energy, they exclude. Not because you're wrong, but because you're heavy. So the professional skill here is not speaking less. It is structuring more. You lead with impact. You compress to essentials. You contain scope, frame options, close directionally. Do you have time? Let's run one final comprehensive example. You are in a cross-functional strategy meeting. Sales missed quarterly targets. You could say, so earlier in the quarter, we saw some fluctuations in demand, and then competitors adjusted pricing, and then our outreach cadence shifted, and some accounts didn't respond as expected. Or you could say, we missed quarterly sales targets by 5% due to the competitor price adjustments in 2 major accounts. The issue is isolated to that segment. We can either adjust pricing to match or increase value-based positioning. I recommend increasing value positioning to protect margin. In 30 seconds, you have explained the problem, contained it, reduced friction, and offered direction. That is usefulness, and usefulness is inclusion. So, here is what I want you to notice this week. Pay attention to how long it takes you to explain a problem. If it takes more than 1 minute to reach the impact, restructure. If your explanation expands in size as you speak, compress. If the room looks uncertain about scope, contain. If the room looks uncertain about next steps, frame options. This is not about speaking less. It's about lowering cost. And professionals who lower cost are invited earlier. Inclusion rarely follows intelligence alone. It follows manageability. When leaders feel that your problems are structured, they feel safe including you. When they feel your explanations are expansive, they protect bandwidth. So the next time you're preparing to explain an issue, do not ask yourself, did I include everything? Ask yourself, did I lower decision cost? Lead with constraint. Compress to essentials. Contain the scope. Frame options. Close directionally. Do that consistently and you will not feel overwhelming. You will feel stabilizing. And stabilizing professionals are pulled closer to decision moments. Next week, we're going to build on this because once your problem explanations are structured, the next level is predictability. And predictable professionals are included earlier. For now, start with structure, start with cost, and watch how the room changes.